Hello hunters, and welcome back to Super Fan Natural. Hunters, I started this channel to talk about the vast and sometimes confusing lore of Supernatural, to answer questions about things that weren't explained super clearly, and to theorize about those that weren't explained at all. I believe that by paying way too much attention to the story and severely overthinking minor plot details, it's possible to pretty convincingly fill in many of the blanks left over after the show's conclusion. However, there are still a few mysteries that are seemingly impossible to fully solve because we just don't have enough information. One of these mega mysteries came in the second episode of Season 13, where we first hear about a race of dark creatures known as the Shedim. We get a very brief description of these shady creeps, which paints them as something nightmarish and primordial, and near the end of the episode, we get a very quick glimpse of one as it tries to crawl out of hell. It really felt like the Shedim were gonna be something that eventually came back and got more information, but ultimately, we just didn't get any more about them. One little blurb and a hand cameo are all we ever got. Naturally, this has led many fans to wonder, just what the hell are these things and where did they come from? Heck, I've asked that very question on this channel before. Well, I think it's time to stop asking and start answering, or at least theorizing. In this video, I'll go over the little that we know about the Shedim and explore a few theories that could explain their place in the wider mythology of Supernatural. Heavy emphasis on theories. As I said a minute ago, this is one of those questions for which we just don't have enough info to truly answer. But that doesn't mean that we can't come up with a few ideas that make sense. Also, this is just talking about the Shedim lore in Supernatural, not necessarily their real-world mythology. With that in mind, let's get into it. To start off, let's go over the very few details that we know about these things. According to the Prince of Hell, Asmodeus, the Shedim are creatures that were, quote, so dark and base that God himself would not allow them into the light. When they're introduced in Season 13, the Shedim were sealed away in a secluded prison buried deep down in hell, with the implication being that God personally put them there, and that they've been locked up since ancient times. We don't have a date for their birth or imprisonment, but the way Asmodeus talks about them makes it seem like they predate the princes, and by the time that the yellow-eyed demons were converted, the Shedim had already been cast into the infernal slammer. Now, we do know that they got loose at least once in the past. See, the reason Asmodeus knows so much about these things is because, as a young and prideful demon, he believed that he could tame their savagery and turn them into powerful weapons for hell. So, he somehow sprung them from their cage or whatever, but, unfortunately, or maybe fortunately for Asmodeus, this plan was quickly kiboshed by Lucifer himself. See, despite being the second of the archangels, and thus one of the most powerful creatures in all of Supernatural, Lucy feared the Shedim. So once he caught wind of Asmodeus' plan, Lucifer swooped in, resealed the Shedim somehow, then gave the young prince a gnarly scar that he held until his death in 2018. This story tells us two very important bits of information. First, Asmodeus' Colonel Sanders accent is either fake, or it's something that's been around since biblical times. But more importantly, the Shedim pose enough of a threat to scare a cosmic entity known for his self-destructive pride and arrogance. And, well, that's about all we know about their backstory. The Shedim only came up in one episode of the show, the Season 13 episode, Rising Sun, where Asmodeus makes another attempt to free these monstrosities for some godforsaken reason. He tricks Lucifer's son, the Nephilim Jack, into using his incredible power to open a devil's gate into the Shedim's unholy timeout corner. One of the creatures nearly manages to escape, getting close enough to reach a single hideous arm out of the pit. This is literally the only glimpse we ever got of the Shedim, just one pale, veiny arm with a hand that ends in long, blackened claws. Before the beast can pull itself out of hell, Jack closes up the gaping gate, and we never see or hear about the Shedim ever again. And that's it. That's literally everything we know about the Shedim, and as you can see, it ain't much. We have no idea who made them, when it happened, or to what end. We don't even really know what they are. All we know is that they're ancient, dark, savage, and dangerous enough to scare the devil himself. So, what the hell could they be? Well, maybe real-life lore can help shed some light onto it. After all, Supernatural didn't invent the Shedim, they're actually creatures from Jewish folklore. According to legend, Shedim are evil spirits associated with the worship of false gods. They eat, drink, multiply, and die like humans, but they also fly around and wield some form of supernatural power like angels. The books of Psalm and Deuteronomy talk about people becoming snared by the worship of other gods, leading them to becoming unclean and willing to sacrifice others to the Shedim. They're presented as a similar manner to demons, and some sources just outright identify them as demons, though others paint them as being something similar yet distinct from fallen angels. Look, I'm no expert on Jewish myth, so the takeaway here is that Shedim in real lore are malicious spirits that are not of the one true God. Whether or not any of that was carried over into the show's version of the creatures is anyone's guess, but at least it gives us something to work with. So with all that in mind, let's get back to the main question. What the hell are these things? Or rather, what could they be? Well, what if they're just really old and nasty demons? I mean, they were locked up in hell, and demons are pretty dark creatures, so maybe these are just the darkest and most corrupt souls. Well, maybe, but there are a few issues there. Firstly, the little we see of the Shedim seems to indicate that they possess a solid corporeal form when on Earth, something that is extremely rare in demons. Most of the time, demons exist only as clouds of smoke while on the material plane, hence why they have to possess people. Now, that's how 99% of demons operate, but there were a couple of exceptions. The Achiri demon was capable of manifesting a tangible body while topside, and it could shift between the forms of a little girl, a monstrous gremlin, and the standard black smoke at will. There was also the Divas, a race of bizarre shadow monsters who were referred to as Zoroastrian demons at one point. These violent freaks were completely invisible except for their shadows, yet they were apparently solid entities that could directly interact with the physical world. They were also creatures of darkness and could be driven off by intense light, so there is precedent for some demons being able to exist in corporeal form. And it's also worth pointing out that both the Devas and Achiri sported long, pointy claws, just like the Shedim. So yeah, they could very well be demons. However, there is another issue that we would have to address. See, we actually know who the oldest demons are in Supernatural. It's an important plot point that Lilith was the very first demon that Lucifer ever created, and later we're directly told that the princes of hell, like Asmodeus, were specifically the second generation of demons created right after Lilith. This would mean that the Shedim would have to have been younger than the princes, and like I said earlier, it just doesn't seem like that's the case. Also, I find it kind of hard to believe that Lucy would create demons strong enough to threaten him. I mean, the princes are clearly stronger than regular angels, and Asmodeus was eventually able to overpower Lucifer when he was weakened. But at full power, there are no demons capable of taking him in direct combat, because why would you make minions stronger than yourself? The only way that I feel the demon theory could work here would be if the Shedim were actually proto-demons. Like, they're the test subjects that Lucy made while he was still perfecting the demonification process. This would allow them to predate Lilith and the princes, and their power could be explained by saying that Lucifer accidentally put a little too much dark mojo into his early subjects, leading them becoming a bit too strong for his liking. So yeah, it's totally possible that the Shedim are demons, but let's explore a few other angles. For example, what if instead of being Lucifer's rough drafts, these dark things are actually some of God's earliest creations? Now, that might sound ridiculous to some of you. I mean, why would God make things so dark and base that he himself wouldn't allow them into the light? God makes nice things like angels and humans and puppies. In fact, the oldest of his creations, the 4 archangels, were made specifically to help the big man fight against his twin sister, a primordial force of destruction and darkness, literally named the Darkness. Why would he go and make other dark creatures? Well, if you don't know, or don't remember, the god of Supernatural is on record as having whipped up some pretty monstrous entities. Before he made humans, or even the rest of the angels, God created a race of ancient beasts known as Leviathans, and while these chompers might have started out okay, it quickly became apparent that they were a bit of a mistake. The Leviathans were extremely powerful, and even more extremely hungry. In fact, they were so ravenous that God realized that they would just eat anything else he made. So he removed them from the earth and locked them away in a separate dimension known as Purgatory. So God has a history of making ancient and powerful things that ultimately prove to be a bit too dangerous, so they have to be sealed away in other dimensions. Maybe the Leviathans weren't an isolated incident. Actually, we know for a fact that they weren't. You know those horrible, vicious, invisible monsters known as hellhounds? Yeah, those were another one of God's early pet projects, one that turned out to be just a bit too violent. Maybe the Shedim were another whoopsie-daisy early rough draft that Chuck didn't like, but chose not to throw out for some reason. I mean, it would be kind of weird that he made something that's described as being infernally dark. But then again, this is the same guy who thought that the world should be inhabited by evil Pac-Men made of black goo, so his taste might just not line up with ours. Or maybe he just missed his twin sister so badly he tried creating dark things to remind him of her, and just didn't go the way he wanted. Actually, that brings up an interesting possibility. Maybe the connection between the Shedim and darkness goes deeper than a throwaway line. What if these savage beasties are too dark for God's taste because they don't actually come from him at all? What if the Shedim are actually creations of the darkness? The connection here shouldn't be hard to understand. The Shedim are described as being dark and savage, and the darkness, aka Amara, is literally the cosmic embodiment of darkness and destruction. I mean, what else can I say? Kinda speaks for itself, doesn't it? Still, there's no mention of Amara ever creating anything the way God does, so this theory wouldn't really make sense unless you could come up with an explanation as to when or why she would make the Shedim. Thankfully, in this particular situation, that's not hard at all. Before getting locked up for 1,000,000,000,000 years, the darkness was at war with her brother and nephews, so it would make sense that she might cook up some minions to help fight back against the forces of light. This would explain not only the creature's origins and gnarliness, but also why Lucifer would fear them. They'd essentially be the dark counterparts to him and his brothers. Honestly, it kind of seems like a perfect explanation, but unfortunately, there are a few problems. Let's start with the idea that the Shedim were whipped up during the Creation War. We don't get much information about the specific details of this battle, but all the dialogue we hear really makes it seem like it was a 1v5, and that Amara lost specifically because she fought alone. Like, nobody involved in this cosmic slap fight says anything to suggest that Team Darkness had any members besides Amara herself. It's also worth pointing out that after getting wailed on by witches, angels, and demons during her rematch against Chuck, Amara says that he cheated again. This is another line that can be interpreted multiple ways, but I think it makes sense that she's complaining about her bro relying on other beings to help fight her, and since she says again, it would imply that their first scuffle was also a 1v5. Okay, so maybe they weren't there during the God War, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they still couldn't have come from Amara. Maybe farting these things into existence was the very last thing she did before getting sent to timeout, a kind of last-ditch effort to wreck her brother's creation. Once again, we run into the problem of there being no direct mention of anything like that happening. But at the same time, no one ever specifically says, nope, Amara definitely didn't leave behind any monsters. So ultimately, it's up to you to decide how much a lack of evidence ruins a theory. Really, for me, the biggest issue is that I just don't believe that Amara has the ability to create complex beings ex nihilo. And even if she can, I don't think that she would. The Darkness's whole deal, the entire reason why she was locked up, was that she absolutely hated the idea of filling existence with anything besides her and God. At several points throughout Season 11, she makes it clear that she fundamentally does not get the hype around creation, that the harmony between her and her brother was already perfect, and the idea of making lesser beings confuses and kind of insults her. Maybe I'm misreading things here, but to me, it really seems like creating a bunch of evil minions is something that Amara just wouldn't do, even if she could. Well, I guess that means that, in spite of how much it would make sense, the Shedim just couldn't have come from the darkness at all in any way. I wouldn't quite go that far. Maybe she didn't build them from the ground up, but I think there's a strong possibility that, just as Lucifer created demons from the souls of mankind, Amara could have been responsible for warping some of God's earliest projects into the Shedim. When she first returned to creation in Season 11, the darkness unleashes a cursed fog onto the world, which has a super corruptive effect on humans. Anyone who gets a good whiff of this stuff will be transformed into a violent, rage zombie-like beast known as a rabid, who retain only humanity's worst qualities. Maybe she did something similar right before being thrown in the cage. She released some form of dark influence meant to draw out the worst in her brother's creations so that he could see for himself why making other beings is a mistake. Under this theory, the Shedim would be early creations who were afflicted by the darkness's influence, purging them of any good qualities and leaving them as horrifically violent monsters. You could also use this same logic to explain why other creatures, like hellhounds and leviathans, went bad. They had flaws, and Amara's lingering corruption drew them out and supercharged them, resulting in beasts so vicious that God had to personally intervene. Now, we did see Chuck effortlessly wipe away the fog and its effects near the end of Season 11, so in order for this theory to work, you'd have to explain why he wouldn't just, do that from the beginning. Well, maybe it's just that some creatures are so thoroughly corrupted by Amara's power that her bro just can't scrub it all from their being. I mean, it's not like this is just some half-baked hoodoo whipped up by some punk-ass human witch. No, this haze comes from a being confirmed to be as strong as God. So if anyone could release a curse that even he couldn't cure, it'd be Amara. This would also explain why he would choose to imprison such dangerous freaks instead of just dusting them. Perhaps he thought that he would eventually figure out a way to cure them? We're kind of drifting away from the realm of evidence, but I feel like I've made my point. It just seems like the darkness could work as a point of origin for him, regardless of whether you think she could create them from nothing. So ultimately, what are the Shedim? Well, without an official source, we may never know for sure. Maybe they're ancient demons. Or perhaps they're some of God's early mistakes. Or it could be that they were a work of the darkness. Or there could be a completely different explanation. Honestly, I kind of like it when stories leave a few minor details unexplained. It gives you something to think and theorize about even after the story is over. And personally, I find that sort of thing really fun, hence why I made this channel in the first place. So once again, what are the Shedim? Well, I've thrown out a few ideas, and I guess I'll let you decide which, if any, you prefer. But what do you guys think? Let me know in the comments. I'll have plenty of awesome videos coming for you in 2025, but for now, carry on.